Okay, I think we're live. um, Good evening, everybody. Let me just make sure we're live. Today is today is Tuesday, December 10th, 2024. I'm very happy tonight to introduce. We're going to have a special guest tonight, George Maragos, who's the former controller of Nassau County. I'm really looking forward to this one tonight. I think it's going to be good because Mr. Maragos, as the controller, has a lot of knowledge about the county, obviously, and I think could help shed some light on some of today's issues concerning the county, Nassau County, as it relates to the topics of the day. So the Sands Casino assessment, the hospital. We're going to try to cover as much as possible today. Before we bring in Mr. Maragos, though, I just wanted to say something. You know, a terrible thing happened last week with the murder of this insurance executive in New York City. And I'm seeing a lot of Facebook posts about this because of the concern about the healthcare industry. And I totally understand that. I really do. I think I have some firsthand knowledge about that, really I'm really impassioned about as well. But you can't condone the murder of a person walking in Manhattan. I mean, just or anywhere else for that matter. Anywhere else. Murder is murder. Come on. So I implore some of the people I see on Facebook and elsewhere, knock it off. I mean, come on. You just can't condone murder. All right. There's nothing else to say. This kid had a great future ahead of him. He had a great education. He seemed to be very bright. He had the whole world in front of him, as they say, and he threw it away in a moment. And he's going to suffer for the rest of his life, as will his family, as will the victims, the children of the victims. So just a terrible story, and there's absolutely nothing to celebrate. And if you are, I don't know what to tell you. You know, you got to look in the mirror and really evaluate your life if you think that that's a good thing that happened in our country and in our city last week. So I won't pontificate on that further. I've already said what I have to say. But without further ado, let me bring on our guest tonight, who is the former controller from Nassau County, as I mentioned, George Maragos. Mr. Maragos, welcome.
Hi, Ray. Thank you for having me. Look forward
Listen,
to talking. Look forward to talking with you.
I'm so excited. I can't tell you. I'm so happy you're joining me tonight. You know, I want your opinion on things, but as much as I want your opinion, I really feel as though you can help educate me and whoever's watching about some of the things that we think we know a little bit about as it pertains to Nassau County, but in actuality, maybe we don't know much about it. So I think this is going to be very informative and very educational, and I thank you for your time tonight.
You're very welcome. Look forward to it.
Before I say anything else, let me just give a little bit of a background. You were comptroller for Nassau County, but before that, you also had a long career in finance and in technology. And it seems like it's the perfect fit for what we would want in the controller's office, right? I mean, you brought your background, you brought your um, private sector background to this job when you became comptroller. Was it a big adjustment for you when you became a government official?
Not really, because I brought my business philosophy with me, and what I've tried to do is, to look at the county as a business and make sure that everything the county does, every dollar that was being spent, we derived the equivalent or more value. And
Let me
and that was kind of phenomenal because we managed, for 8 years, quite well, bringing the county out of the financial stress that it had found itself in.
Let me just share a little something if I can here. This is Mr. Maragos's background prior to his job as controller, and you can see his extensive experience prior to joining the county. In case anybody was wondering or forgot, here it is. But before we get into that, let me talk to you about the current situation. Mr. Maragos, where does the county get its money from? I mean, we know that we pay a lot of money in taxes, but I think a lot of us are confused because the school tax goes to the school districts, but the county only gets the general tax portion of our tax bill, right? So is it true that the county is getting most of our money from sales tax and general tax levy? Is that where the money comes from
Yeah,
primarily?
that's correct. About 3/4 of the money, maybe 80%, comes from sales tax, being the biggest revenue source, which recently has and nicely grown to about 1.6 billion a year. And then sales tax revenues, property taxes, is the second largest source of about 900 million.
And we saw something happen. This is after your time as controller, but obviously with the COVID um, situation, there was money that was pushed out to the municipalities. So Nassau County, I think the towns got some money. I guess the first question I'd ask you is, do you think that the county and our towns handle that COVID distribution appropriately?
Uh, Sadly, I don't think so, because some of it, if they made promises that they would distribute it out to needy taxpayers, and they did not do that. But yet, it seems, looking at their financial results, they retained the money, increased the spending significantly, and used the money, the ARPA money, and the various grants that they got to cover the deficits that they were generating, in order to cover the deficits, and lo and behold, declare surpluses.
So are you anticipating that because those one-time handouts from COVID are no longer with us, that we're going to have some accounting that we're going to have to adjust for now? We're going to have some, what's going to happen now that the money's run
Well,
out from
it
COVID?
seems, that all the grants and the reserves, certainly at the county level, are going to be depleted by the end of 2025. They've been drawing down at a rate of approximately $200 million a year to cover the rising expenditures. So after the 2025 and 2026 and beyond, and when those grants, there will be no more grants, and the reserves would have been depleted, I'm not sure how they're going to be able to manage. Of course, they can always resort to borrowing.
Give me for 1 second, Mr. Maragos. I take some notes here. So as per, let me just get this. As per your calculations, 2025, the end of 2025 is when the reserves are going to be depleted.
Yes, most will be depleted.
Is there any? Mhm.
They're using for 25. I think they're going to use $200 million in reserves to cover their expenditures, and that will essentially deplete, maybe leaving about $30 million in reserves.
Where do you see the sales tax revenue? Is there a possibility? And I guess this ties into my next question about the casino, because we hear a lot of chatter about the casino and what it means. And I want to ask you a question about this two ways. What's your personal opinion about the casino? But then also, as in your former capacity as controller, what do you think it means for the county in terms of finances? Because I've had a hard time. I try to ask this question of many people in office, and I get all kinds of they dodge. What's your thought about the casino, and can it help the county financially?
Yeah, I cannot address the moral issues surrounding the casino, but from a financial point of view, it will definitely be an asset. Keep in mind that the Suffolk County casino generates about $120 million, and that's growing substantially annually. We do have some revenue from gambling. About 1,000 machines that the county was granted by the state a few years ago.
Right.
They were then subleased to Aqueduct, generating about 20 million. So there's a differential of about $100 million differential between what Suffolk receives and what the Nassau County can derive from a casino.
And is it fair to say, sir, that if we don't get that money from sales tax revenue, based on what we just spoke about, does it mean that it inherently has to come from taxes, or there's no other source if we have a shortfall? No?
Well, the last source for government is always to borrow money rather than to tax, and tax has become rather unpopular. So they can certainly do that for a few years, which will cause our financial standing to deteriorate. But it's also not a good policy to so-called kick the can down the road and put the responsibility on future administrations and future generations.
It seems like, and I want to be careful, I'm not putting words in your mouth, sir, but it seems like, from my point of view, based on what you're saying, that on the projected shortfall that we're anticipating for, let's say, 2025, end of 2025, that in order to make up that money, it's either going to be tax increases, sales tax increase, sales tax revenue increase, perhaps from the casino, perhaps, or as you say, borrowing. Right? There's really no other way the money's coming in.
Right.
There's got
The first choice will be borrowing. Of course, the financial situation can deteriorate rapidly if our economy goes into recession, and sales tax, which is the largest source of revenue, substantially decline. Then we will have, as a county, as residents, a really difficult time funding our government.
And let me ask you, sir, because this is a topic of the day that a lot of people have been talking about in the newspaper and so forth. It's been with us for so many years. It's not a new topic exactly, but how does the hospital play into the county budget? And what are your thoughts about the hospital? And is there a possibility that the hospital can really take down the county financially?
No, it cannot. The county has guaranteed approximately, I think now it's down to about 85, $86 million in loan guarantees to the hospital. So that is not relative to a $4 billion budget. That will not be significant. But the county also contributes about $20 million annually to sustain the hospital. And it behooves me why we have $86 million at risk. We're giving the hospital about $20 million a year to sustain it, and yet the controller, and I don't like to talk badly of anybody, has not gone in to do an audit of the finances of the hospital. We all read that the hospital is in dire straits, risks going out of business in effect, extremely reliant on state funding, while at the same time kind of fighting with the state on as to who's going to run the hospital. So it's not a good situation for our residents that rely on the hospital for their health services.
It's been a few years since you've been in office, sir, and I know things have changed a little bit, but let me ask you this. When you were in office, how much of the hospital finances were on your mind? Was this like the issue? Was this a big problem that you had to think about every day? Or what was your thinking about the hospital when you were in office?
It wasn't, my biggest concern, but it was a concern because obviously, it provides essential services to our residents. I wanted to see it succeed. And we did go in and do an audit, and we found substantial mismanagement. They had, and I can't recall the exact number, but it was a significant number of reserves that were sitting on their books for years, uncollected. As an example, and you can run a business like that, and then complain that you're not, you might go out of business, or you have to get the significant funding either from the county or the state when you're not collecting the revenues that you've earned.
It's interesting because the hospital brings so many different things involving the county in play, and one of those things, or one of those entities, is NIFA. So I'm really curious to figure out, what are your thoughts about NIFA and the role that they play for the county and the role they play specifically for the hospital?
Well, NIFA has played a constructive role to temper the political urges to spend and not report accurately to the residents. As I said, if you look at the county financial statements and the press releases, they claim every year they have a surplus. But that surplus is derived from, injecting about $200 million worth of reserves, of grants. And that's how they derive their balance. Of course, they don't point that out to the residents, and NIFA does.
So, and I could be wrong about this, but I think knife has been around now since about 2000, right? It's been about 24,
Right,
25 years.
2001, I believe. Yes.
Yeah. Do you see NIFA going away at some point, or do you think that that we need them for a prolonged period of time? I mean, it's been 24 years. Do we think we need them for another 25, or do you think that the end is in
I
sight?
think they serve a constructive purpose until the county finances are put in better shape. And of course, legally, they can stay around until the borrowing, which is about $1 billion that the NIFA has borrowed on behalf of the county, is fully repaid.
Yeah, one thing I always found interesting about NIFA is that they do a lot of work and a lot of good work, but none of the members on NIFA are paid, right? These are all volunteers, or not volunteers, but they're appointed to the position. But I believe they're all unpaid, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
So you have a non-paid entity that's acting, in some regard as the adults in the room when it comes to things like borrowing and spending and things like that.
Yeah,
I guess that's it.
nobody likes to have somebody look over their shoulders, but in this case, I think they have had a positive influence in tempering the spending urges of politicians.
And whether you think it's more on, the board of directors, the new chairperson of the hospital, or the state, or everybody involved, do you think that the hospital, I guess this is a broad question, but do you think the hospital can be saved financially? Do you have any thoughts on that, or what are your thoughts?
No, absolutely. First of all, I think it should be saved. Secondly, I think they need new management. Thirdly, I think they need to have a good relationship with the state and of course, the county. And lastly, I think they need better financial management.
Yeah. I'll share with you, Mr. Maragos, one of my pet peeves of the hospital is that they don't tell you who the board of directors are. I mean, in other words, they have the names, but they don't tell you what the qualifications are. And, I would question, there are people on there who say they're doctors. I would love to know what they're doctors of, and I'll leave it at that. But
Right.
there are a number of people on the board who I think deserve a little bit of scrutiny at the hospital board, as to who they are and what role they play on the hospital board, as opposed to being just a political appointee. But my personal opinion.
I would agree with that.
What are your thoughts on the assessment situation? This is something else that we've been with for such a long time, Mr. Maragos, this assessment. Everyone is so confused. I mean, I know a little bit about this because I've run for office and because I've been, well, what are your thoughts on the assessment situation? I mean, has it gotten better or worse under Blakeman? What are your thoughts?
You're picking on all the hot buttons, I see.
Oh, yeah. I got to make use of our time.
That's an age-old problem with the county that has not gotten any better and has not gotten any worse, which of course doesn't say much because the county is spending about, I would estimate, about $60 million a year in the tax refunds, which is a significant liability. And every administration comes in and says they're going to fix it, and of course, all they do, which is what this administration has done, I guess as recently as August, is freeze the tax roll. So whatever problems are in here in the system continue to plague the county and unfairly redistribute the tax burden on most people that are not aware or don't file tax grievances, which is about 40% of our residents.
And as if you use the words kicking the can down to the future, is that basically what's happening by freezing the roll, that you're not addressing the problem now, you're just waiting to push it down to the future? And
No, that's not a problem that cannot be pushed down, because the county has a tax liability because its assessment is not correct. It has issues. All these legal firms find issues with it and challenge the assessment for commercial as well as residential real estate. They win the reductions in their taxes, and that shifts the tax burden onto people that don't grieve.
I want to read for you, Mr. Maragos, a comment from a friend of mine, Diane Madden, who commented on Facebook. George Maragos is an honorable man, and I will never forget his concern and bravery to audit the Hempstead Animal Shelter. We need more boots on the ground, we more recently got into represent. So I was going to ask you about the operational audit. You mentioned that word earlier when we talked about the hospital, but you had some success when you were in office challenging or looking for an operational audit specifically for the town of Hempstead Animal Shelter. Do you think that every department in every town should be audited as in terms of operationally, or you should have that right as a controller for the county? I mean, what are your thoughts on an operational audit and the significance of them?
I think it's essential that almost every department is periodically audited um, to ensure that it's running effectively. The money is well spent to the maximum benefit of the taxpayers. And audits are not always perceived as, of course, they're perceived as being intrusive and negative. They should be welcomed by, especially certainly by the new administrations to come in and help them find out issues that they should take action to correct and make those departments more efficient. And then I think audits is actually one of the primary functions of the controller's office.
When you were in office, who gave you the most pushback on these operational audits? Was it the department themselves? Was it the animal shelter? Was it the town? Who gave you the most pushback on the operational audit that you saw?
The police department, believe it or not. Sorry to say.
It's an interesting question, though. Do you think that the police union has too much control over what goes on in this county?
No, it really wasn't that, and it was that they feel that they're kind of they're independent, they're secretive, and when I tried to when I got the pushback, I tried to convince them that I'm not trying to highlight blame on anybody. I want to go in and see how they're spending some money, in certain areas. Certainly, given my background in technology area, as an example, and see if they're getting the technology that they need, and they're operating in a way for them to better do their job, for them to get better value for the money that the taxpayers are spending. So I wasn't intent on being critical and finding fault, but which was my approach in all the audits, was to go in and help the administration of those departments find opportunities to do better.
Interesting. And we talked about the casino, but the casino is a development, a large development, but it's one thing. We have a larger issue in Nassau County and in Long Island in general about affordable housing, and there's been different approaches to this issue. From your perspective, sir, I mean, what are your thoughts about how we solve this affordable housing crisis? It's a regional problem, really, but let's say make it specific to Nassau County. Do you think pilots are a good use of is a good tool in the belt to use to try to incentivize affordable housing, or do you think it's a waste of taxpayer money?
From what I've seen, in theory, pilots can be great. In practice, normally in most cases, they don't deliver on the value to the county that was anticipated, whether in terms of spurring more development or providing the jobs that they were originally promised to provide for the tax benefits that they were given.
Is there something?
And there's very little follow-up to ensure that those benefits are derived by the county in this case. And I've encouraged that to change, and I'd like to see it change.
It seems this issue of housing is so controversial. There's so many different arguments one way or the other way. I mean, people want transit-based development around the train stations and so forth, but then that puts on pressure on the schools, and there's traffic issues and so forth. Is there an obvious way, or I mean, I don't know. I wish I did.
I don't know, and that's beyond my level of expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are right. It's a multidimensional problem, and I don't think any one person has a solution. It'll have to, but it's an issue though that is real, is critical, and it should be discussed in public and with public input.
And I would say this, I would ask you this, as specifically or as general as you want to answer it, how do you grade the Blakeman administration as far as physically managing the county and your successor, Elaine Phillips?
Oh,
What
I don't want to, Ray. I don't want to do that. I don't want
Okay.
to. I
I
leave
mean,
that
do you
up to
think
the
do you
taxpayer.
think do you think that are financially though that are we in good shape, or do you think that we have issues? I mean, we're talking about reserves being run out by 2025. Is there a reason for the average taxpayer to be concerned to the point where we need to really dive into this and
Yes, yes. The county, the residents should be very concerned because, as I indicated, when you have a kind of misleading financial statements that they're declaring surpluses, but surpluses are derived by using our reserves
Mhm.
and depleting our reserves. That should be used. It should be available for a rainy day. I think that's almost malpractice.
I want to ask you a very specific question because this is something I've been wondering about for a long time. Sometimes politicians use Wall Street as a tool when it helps them. And again, so in other words, when the county and I'm not saying Bruce Blakeman's done this recently, but I think Oyster Bay has. When Moody's comes in and says the town finances look to be structurally sound, or the county's, how much weight should we put on outside people looking at if Moody's comes in and says the town of Oyster Bay looks like it's okay, does that mean that we should sit back and say, I guess must be looking at the right information, or are those reports kind of do they have any kind of prejudice to them, or do they look at certain things and not look at the whole picture? How much time does the county or the town spend wooing Wall Street, and how much stock should we put in those assessments?
No, those assessments are looking back. They don't look forward. Okay, so when you're sitting, let's say, with $500 million of reserves, okay, and they don't care how you arrive at a balanced budget or a surplus. They care that you have some reserves and you're managing to your budget. So from that point of view, since they received about $400 billion in COVID money, ARPA money from the federal government, another $100 million, from the NIFA refinancing the debt, and I think $20 million from the opiate
Mhm.
settlement.
Mhm.
That brought in a matter of maybe a year, 18 months, a lot of money. That changed the financial standing of the county substantially. So now when they're declaring surpluses, they're declaring them because they're drawing down, depleting their reserves. And those reserves now are going to be used, guess what? By the end of 25, which is the end of their term. So they're going to
Yeah.
look back and say, look, we Moody's and Standard and Poor's and have increased our credit rating, and they have. But that's looking backwards, not looking forward.
Just looking at the numbers overall, do you think that we have too much debt, the appropriate amount of debt? Do you think I mean, I don't think anyone wants more debt, but do you think we have the appropriate amount of debt to manage with our revenues of this situation, or do you think that the
Yes,
debt
we
itself?
do. We do. We have substantial borrowing capacity.
And are we getting that money I mean, my conversations, whenever I've spoken to people, I've often thought that we're getting it at the right numbers, right? We're refinanced and we're paying the appropriate amount of interest on the debt that we have. We're not overpaying. They've
That's correct.
refinanced where they could.
That's correct. Yes.
Is that largely because of NIFA, or is that because the county has done their part as well, or is it just because everyone's kind of done their job? I mean, what's your sense on the management of debt?
Well, the credit rating is a reflection of our credit worthiness. So we're borrowing at market rate for those the credit rating that we have, and that's fine. We have the capacity to borrow substantially more.
I'm on the outside, but it seems to me that the county's managing of the financial situation post-COVID and not getting money from is going to be the challenge for all municipalities, where you had this handout and now you've got to adjust and not going to have the handout. That to me seems to be a big risk. Is
Exactly.
that what?
Exactly, and that's that. We're going to be confronted with that situation with the 2026 budget. 2025 is is fine. We're still going to draw down about $200 million in reserves, but there will be very little left for 2026 and beyond. While I must point out, our spending, and this is what shocked me when I looked at the numbers between the 2022 budget and the 2024 budget. Our spending, the county spending, grew by 43%. By 43%.
Wow.
In a matter of 3 years. That's a huge increase. Now you can say, well, inflation was 21% during that period. Okay. But we grew at our spending grew twice the rate of inflation. That's remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I have to ask you about another hot button question or topic is red light cameras. We talk about revenue and we didn't talk about red light cameras, but certainly we know that they generate a lot of money for the county. How did you look at that when you were in office? Did you look at it as a reoccurring income stream, or did you look at it as kind of like, they're being challenged now, so I don't know what's going to happen exactly with red light cameras. I think Suffolk County is on pause. But is this I guess it's not a moral question, but I guess, does it generate enough money for the county that if it were to no longer be in place, it would be a problem?
Yeah, I think it generates about $50 million a year. And you're right, it's being challenged. And I think there was a recent court decision on appeal that found the excessive administrative fees that were being charged as unlawful. And consequently, there hasn't been a final ruling, but I would expect that those there was the red light camera fine was $50, and there was another $100 in administrative fees. Okay.
Right.
And I think the court found that the administrative fee cannot exceed the cost to, I guess, administer the program. And they deemed that should be no more than $50. So that leaves the county with a potential liability now of $50 times whatever number of tickets that they issued since 2010. I think I did a rough calculation that could represent a liability now to the county of about $150 to $300 million of money that they need to give back.
Yeah, it's interesting because you brought up something that I actually wanted to follow up with you on. You talk about liabilities and you talk about things that pop up. If this is money that we have to give back that we haven't accounted for, but things like that happen sometimes. Whether it's a lawsuit or whatever it is. How much of your job when you were comptroller involved things like insurance? I mean, do you think that does the county have the right insurance to guard against potential lawsuits and litigation? Like, I look at this and I go, one lawsuit can knock out the county for, somebody wins a $50 million lawsuit or whatever it is. What do? You have to go out and bond to pay that lawsuit, to pay that the settlement or whatever it might be. Are the residents of the county always going to be at risk that there could be one-off that just puts a real dent in our budget every year?
Yes, it could be. And I don't know how you can ensure that. But one area that I think that I had identified was, the workman's compensation insurance that the county elected to be and still is self-insured. It means that it is liable for any accidents its employees have to the full extent. That's something that I think for the money that they spend annually, because the police is a very hazardous job. So it's possible, or public works. And I just don't know what the statistics are. But when I looked at it back in, I'm not sure when, during my term, I did recommend that, workman's compensation, as an example, we should not be self-insured, and it'll be more cost effective to buy insurance.
I'm so fascinated by that because I think that's just the kind of like nonpartisan thing that people need to understand. So it's so interesting. So you're saying that the county does not use a carrier for workers' comp insurance. We are self-insured and we're at risk to pay any settlement or anything that has to be paid off.
That's correct. Which, as you rightly point out, expose us to, maybe we're saving some years' money, but it certainly exposes us to a huge potential liability.
What's interesting also is that, I mean, is it, to your knowledge, was it because things like the state insurance fund, were they too carriers like the state insurance fund, which is,
Well,
I
it is
think,
it is expensive, but the
yeah.
liability can cost you more, right? It's always the trade-off that you have whether to buy car insurance or homeowner insurance, right?
All right.
Whether
But,
you're going to spend a little money to avoid spending a lot of money,
but,
and
but, but when
likely
you
you'll never
sell,
have to use it.
right, but when you self-insure, you can never really, you're hoping that you're earning enough money to pay out whatever you've got to pay out whenever that were to occur. And I don't want to minimize people who have, suffered and need those payouts. But the idea from a macro level is the county's on the hook for those payments.
That's right.
And how in the world could you ever project somebody getting hurt next year? I mean, I guess you can use some tables or something, try to figure out some averages, but there's really no way of knowing if somebody gets hurt and is a $50 million lawsuit or
No,
whatever it might
there
be.
isn't, and that's the liability that you buy insurance for.
Do you think the county uses too many consultants, or do you think, given the size, I mean, I don't want to understate the size of our economy. I mean, it's a big county. We use a lot of consultants, a lot of attorneys and a lot of everything. Did you have that concern when you were in office, or do you
Yeah,
think we have the?
mostly a lot of attorneys, not a lot of business consultants, but a lot of attorneys.
I don't want to put you on the hot spot on that, but attorneys doing work for that the county maybe could do in-house, or do you think that it needs to be done externally?
It depends on a case by case basis. I cannot opine on that.
Okay, let me ask you this question, sir. Coming from your technology background, I was having a debate with a friend of mine. How do you, and I know it's been some time since you've been in office, but in terms of the systems that the county has, do we have the appropriate computers and appropriate systems in place to your knowledge, or do you think that that's something that we have to identify needing to spend some money on going forward, updating computer systems? I mean, I go to the Mineola and the people are great, but you go into these buildings and sometimes you're walking right into the 70s, and you sometimes think about what the computers.
It's archaic. Our technology is archaic. And maybe that's a good thing sometimes, right? Because we still have some of the systems running on COBOL, which means that you cannot hack them, but nobody knows how to hack it. So
Right.
it's humorous in that regard, right? So
I know it is funny, but it's a good point, because the more updated you get with technology, the more risk you are, right? So maybe the old systems are to your point. Wow, interesting.
But yes, we need to modernize, of course, in order to improve productivity and provide more efficient services to the public. But I remain aghast at the lack of modernization, and I'm not going to name names, but when I was in the last year, when this cloud computing started taking hold and becoming popular and tested as a technology, we wanted to migrate our financial systems to the cloud, which made sense, right? As opposed to having servers in house and technicians to maintain them and software developers to upgrade the software. And I think we would it would cost us about $1 million to a year, I think, to just implement a state-of-the-art system with best practices for $1 million, a year. We were spending a lot more maintaining our system at the time. And I found out a couple of years later that the county and with the controller's office made the decision to go out and spend $40 million with consultant and software developers, with annual maintenance well in excess of $1 million or $2 million, to replicate the legacy systems that we have without best practices, and kind of shackling the county now to continue to maintain and operate an archaic system. So,
let me just zoom out for a second, sir, and get your perspective on a couple other things. So when you look, you look at your career and you look at the private sector and public sector, did you feel your service in public sector was rewarding, or did you find it to be frustrating? I struggle with this because I sometimes think I want to get into government, then I think maybe I'd get frustrated. How do you look back on this now? You think about it in terms of your career. Was it rewarding? Was it frustrating? How do you feel?
it was extremely rewarding, and I would encourage more people that have been successful in private life to get to run for office, to get into to be of public service. I found it extremely rewarding. I think I made a difference. Uh, and I kind of tell people, that you can give some money to charity, and you feel good about it, that you help. You don't know who you help, but you help the cause. With government, if you go in with the right noble intention to be a public service, you can help an awful lot of people and make a difference in their lives. And I derived a lot of satisfaction from that.
And I hear you say that, and I'm listening, and I think sometimes what's lacking is that we need politicians who are willing to make decisions today, and they may not be in office to see the consequence of those decisions, right? I mean, if you put the county on sound financial footing for a period of time, not just the county, it could be the state, it could be the country, it could be anything. These things don't happen overnight, right? It may take 5 years for you to see the full results of your decisions that you make today. Do you feel like I guess this is a broad question, but politicians have that urge to constantly win re-election. I mean, they want to win re-election, so they got to do what's best in the moment. Is that what happens sometimes on the county level? Is that what you saw as well, or is that just my perception?
Yeah, career politicians, they haven't demonstrated competence in the private world to manage people, to manage teams, to get things done, effectively, efficiently. So it's not a surprise that we get the results that we do. And you're right, their motivation is, to get reelected, to do as little as possible, which is controversial, to try to avoid making major decisions, because, you make a decision, it may work, it may not work. Okay. Right. But of course, if you have some competence and experience, it's more likely that it will work and be of benefit to the taxpayer. If you don't, you're afraid to make decisions. So you tend to hide the problems and let them pile up. And that's not in the public interest.
And we talk about problems at the hospital or problems anywhere in the county. CSEA as a union, did you find them to be generally responsive and cooperative to you, or did you find pushback on some of the things that you wanted to do when you were in office?
No, I think they were cooperative. Of course, often they would fight for their members, and that's fine. But overall, I think they were cooperative, and the employees were, I think, competent, and they would do a good job. I had no issues there at all.
I was going to ask you more broad questions, but just one more specific question. Are our pension obligations manageable at this point?
Yes, the county pays into the state pension fund. Okay, and those payments have to be made every year. So the state pension fund is fully funded.
Right. So that falls under the state jurisdiction, right, and the state controller. Okay. I guess in our remaining moments, any thoughts about the county as it relates to the new administration coming into office? Do you think that I don't know. I mean, the money for COVID is run out, whether it was a Democrat or Republican who was going to win. The COVID is past us now. We're past COVID now, right? So that money was going to dry up. But do you think that the county, I mean, things like the SALT deduction didn't have, or the elimination of SALT, it affected us, but it didn't affect the county per se. Is there anything that you would be particularly concerned about or hopeful about with the new administration?
No, not really. I think they seem to have a very good relationship with our future president, and I think that will work well for the county and the residents.
Any thoughts? I'm going to say this as my last question, Mr. Maragos, and I appreciate the time tonight. I learned a lot. Any thoughts? I know you've run for office since you've been controller, but any thoughts about running again?
My wife won't let me. That's the honest answer.
Listen, I want you in office, but it's good for me. I can do more of these maybe with you. I really appreciate it, and I thank you for your time tonight, Mr. Maragos.
Thank you, Ray. I truly enjoyed it.
Merry Christmas to you and your
Happy
family. Thank you.
holidays. Merry
Yeah,
Christmas.
thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Maragos.
Bye.
Okay, folks, there you have it. That was George Maragos, the former controller from Nassau County. I hope we asked the right questions, but if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please do so on the post, and hopefully we'll get answers from Mr. Maragos, or we'll try to get some answers, follow-up questions, and so forth. Thanks very much, and look forward to doing this again soon. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, everybody. Thank you.